"You're being let go, Emily," Marcus said, leaning back in his custom leather chair, his Rolex catching the afternoon light as he gestured dismissively with my performance review. After 8 years of helping transform Vertex Solutions from a struggling tech consultancy to an industry powerhouse, I recognized the calculated indifference in his eyes. I'd seen it before when he dismissed others, but I never imagined I'd be on the receiving end, especially not after I'd secretly begun acquiring shares in the company through my family's investment firm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day had started like any other. I arrived at Vertex Solutions' sleek downtown headquarters at 7:15 a.m., a full hour before most of the executive team. As Chief Innovation Officer, I'd made early mornings my ritual, using the quiet time to review our product development pipeline and prepare strategy recommendations. The company had grown exponentially since I joined, from a 12-person operation struggling to keep the lights on to a 250-employee technology consultancy with clients across 3 continents. My corner office overlooked the river, a view I'd earned through years of dedication and results. The walls displayed framed patents bearing my name alongside the company's tangible proof of my contributions to Vertex's growth. 8 years of sacrificed weekends, postponed vacations, and midnight strategy sessions had paid off in both professional recognition and financial reward. Or so I thought. The first sign something was amiss came in the form of a meeting request from Marcus Reed, CEO and majority owner of Vertex Solutions. Performance review discussion, 2 p.m. was all the calendar invite said. Unusual, given that formal reviews weren't scheduled for another 3 months. Still, I didn't think much of it. Our latest client acquisition strategy had been particularly successful, and I assumed Marcus wanted to discuss expanding the initiative. In the hours before the meeting, I finalized my presentation for next week's industry conference, where I was representing Vertex as a keynote speaker. The topic, Disruptive Innovation in Traditional Markets, reflected the approach I'd championed within the company, identifying overlooked opportunities in established industries and creating technology solutions that transformed client operations. At 1:55 p.m., I gathered my notes and laptop, expecting a strategic discussion about future initiatives. The executive floor was unusually quiet as I approached Marcus's office. His assistant, Vanessa, avoided eye contact as she announced my arrival through the intercom. "Send her in," came Marcus's curt reply. I entered to find not just Marcus, but also Greg Parsons, our recently hired COO, and Diane from HR. The presence of human resources immediately set off alarm bells. "Take a seat, Emily," Marcus said, not bothering to rise from his chair. The formality was jarring. Typically, our interactions had an easy camaraderie built over years of collaboration. I sat across from the 3 of them, suddenly feeling like I was facing a tribunal rather than attending a performance discussion. "We'll keep this brief," Marcus continued, sliding a folder across his glass desk. "Vertex is moving in a new strategic direction, and we've determined that your approach to innovation no longer aligns with company objectives." I left the folder untouched. What new direction? As Chief Innovation Officer, shouldn't I have been consulted about strategic realignments involving my department? Marcus exchanged glances with Greg, who cleared his throat before speaking. "We're pivoting towards standardized service offerings with higher scalability and predictable revenue streams. Your focus on customized solutions and experimental technologies, while impressive, doesn't support our growth targets." The real story suddenly became clear. Greg had joined Vertex 6 months ago from Axiom Consulting, bringing a corporate mentality that contrasted sharply with the entrepreneurial culture we'd built. Since his arrival, he'd been systematically consolidating power, replacing long-standing team members with former colleagues, and restructuring departments to report through him. "This isn't about strategic alignment," I said evenly. "This is about control and credit for the innovation pipeline I've built. Your perspective is unfortunate, but not surprising, Marcus replied, his tone dismissive. Your performance metrics have been declining for 2 quarters. Client feedback indicates your approach is increasingly disconnected from market needs. This was blatantly false. My department had delivered 3 major client innovations in the past quarter alone, generating over $4 million in new revenue. Our client satisfaction scores led the company. That's simply not true, I countered, maintaining my composure despite rising anger. I'd like to see the data supporting those claims. The decision is final, Emily, Marcus cut in. Diane has your separation package details. Today will be your last day. IT is currently securing your accounts and preparing your personal items for collection. The coldness of it was stunning. 8 years of dedication reduced to a clinical dismissal based on manufactured performance issues. I looked at Marcus, the man I'd considered both mentor and friend, searching for any sign of the person who had once valued my contributions so highly. I found nothing but calculated indifference. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. We appreciate your contributions to Vertex, Marcus replied mechanically. But companies evolve, and sometimes leadership must evolve with them. Greg will be absorbing your responsibilities while we evaluate restructuring options for the innovation division. I turned to Diane, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I'll need my attorney to review any separation documents before I sign them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She nodded. Of course. The package includes 6-month severance and accelerated vesting of your current stock options. We'll need your company devices before you leave today. I stood, leaving the folder on Marcus's desk. I'll have my lawyer contact you regarding the agreement. Is there anything else? Your building access will be deactivated at 5 p.m., Marcus said, already turning his attention to his computer screen, effectively dismissing me. Please ensure any personal items are removed by then. Walking back to my office, I felt strangely calm. The shock would come later, I knew. But in that moment, a clarity I hadn't expected washed over me. For 8 years, I had conflated my identity with Vertex Solutions, viewing its successes as my own and its challenges as my personal responsibility. In one cold, calculated meeting, that connection had been severed. What Marcus didn't know, what no one at Vertex knew, was that 6 months ago, I had begun a parallel journey that would prove unexpectedly fortuitous in this moment. My grandfather had passed away, leaving me as the managing trustee of our family's investment firm, Preston Holdings. While small compared to major investment houses, Preston managed a respectable portfolio worth over $75 million. Initially, I had taken a passive role, allowing our longtime financial advisors to continue their conservative investment approach. But 3 months ago, after analyzing market trends and recognizing undervalued opportunities in the tech sector, I had begun directing strategic investments personally. One of those investments was Vertex Solutions. The company had gone public 2 years earlier, and while Marcus retained majority control through his shares, about 35% of the company traded on the open market, using Preston Holdings as the purchasing entity. I had quietly begun acquiring shares, believing deeply in the company's potential despite recent market undervaluation. As of this morning, Preston Holdings owned nearly 8% of Vertex Solutions' outstanding shares, making us the 3rd largest shareholder. None of this appeared under my name. Legally, the investments were made by Preston Holdings, with no public's connection to me personally. My plan had been to eventually reveal my investment position to Marcus as a demonstration of my commitment to the company's future. Now, that revelation would come under very different circumstances. Back in my office, I found Jacob, our IT director, awkwardly waiting with a cardboard box containing a few personal items from my desk. My computer was already gone. "I'm sorry about this, Emily," he said quietly. "I was told to secure your devices immediately." "It's not your fault, Jacob," I assured him, taking the box. "You're just doing your job." Inside were framed photos of my family, a few industry awards, and a small collection of handwritten thank you notes from team members I'd mentored over the years. 8 years of professional life reduced to a single cardboard box. My phone buzzed with messages from my leadership team. Word was spreading quickly. I decided against responding immediately, needing time to process what had happened and determine my next steps before communicating with others. As I prepared to leave, my assistant Layla appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "Is it true? They're letting you go?" "Apparently, my approach to innovation no longer aligns with company objectives," I replied, unable to keep the irony from my voice. "That's absurd. Your division generated over 40% of our new business last quarter." Layla had been with me for 5 years, evolving from an efficient assistant to an invaluable strategic partner. "Greg's consolidating power," I explained. "My department was the last major division outside his direct control." "What happens to the team?" Layla asked, concern evident in her voice. "Greg will oversee things temporarily while they evaluate restructuring options, which likely means bringing in someone from his previous company to implement standardized processes." Layla's expression darkened. "This is going to devastate morale. Half the innovation team joined Vertex specifically to work with you." "Tell everyone I'll be in touch soon," I promised. "Right now, I need to process this and consider next steps." As I walked toward the elevator, carrying my small box of possessions, I passed the glass-walled conference room where my innovation team was gathered, evidently having been called to an emergency meeting. Through the glass, I could see Greg, standing at the front of the room, likely explaining the exciting new direction for the department. Several team members noticed me passing, and their expressions conveyed everything from shock to outrage. I gave a small nod, maintaining my composure, and continued to the elevator. The theater of corporate dismissal required dignity and exit, and I wouldn't give Marcus or Greg the satisfaction of seeing me affected. In the privacy of my car, however, the reality began to sink in. 8 years of my professional life had just been terminated in a 15-minute meeting based on manufactured performance issues. The sense of betrayal was profound, particularly from Marcus, who had recruited me personally with promises of building something meaningful together. Rather than driving home, I found myself heading toward Harbor Park, a quiet green space overlooking the bay where I often walked when working through complex problems. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as I found a bench facing the water. Setting my box of possessions beside me, I took out my personal phone and began to process what had just happened. First, I called my attorney, Sophia Winters, and briefed her on the situation, asking her to review the separation agreement when it arrived and to ensure my interests were protected. "They're claiming performance issues?" Sophia asked, her tone skeptical. "With your documented results?" "It's pretext," I explained. "The new COO wants control of the innovation division, and Marcus is supporting him despite our history." "We'll scrutinize every clause," Sophia assured me. "Don't sign anything until I've reviewed it thoroughly." Next, I called my financial advisor at Preston Holdings, Michael Chen, who had been helping execute my investment strategy in Vertex. "I need to accelerate our position," I told him after explaining my termination. "You want to increase our stake in a company that just fired you?" Michael asked, understandably confused. "I was fired because of internal politics, not because the company lacks value," I explained. "In fact, my termination creates an opportunity. The market doesn't know about the leadership change yet, and when it's announced, there may be a temporary dip in share price." "What's your target ownership?" "Percentage?" Michael asked, professional interest overcoming his initial surprise. "Let's move toward 15% ownership," I decided. the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. Execute gradually over the next 2 weeks to avoid driving up the price unnecessarily. And Michael, continue keeping my connection to Preston Holdings confidential. It's more important than ever now. After ending the call, I sat quietly, watching boats move across the harbor as I contemplated my situation with growing clarity. What had initially felt like a devastating professional blow was evolving into something different, an unexpected liberation and opportunity. For 8 years, I had poured my creativity and intelligence into innovations that benefited Vertex Solutions, operating within the constraints of corporate priorities and politics. Now, suddenly, those constraints were gone. My knowledge, experience, and industry connections remained intact, but I was free to apply them however I chose. As the sun began to set over the harbor, I opened my notebook and began to outline next steps, both personal and professional. The methodical planning process had always been my response to challenges, a way of transforming uncertainty into actionable strategy. By the time darkness fell, I had developed the framework for 3 potential paths forward. Join a competing consultancy in a senior innovation role. Several would likely be interested given my track record and client relationships. Start my own innovation consultancy, leveraging my reputation and methodology to attract clients seeking the approach Vertex was now abandoning. Use my position as a significant Vertex shareholder through Preston Holdings to influence company direction and potentially challenge the leadership decisions that led to my termination. Each path had merit, but as I considered them, I found myself increasingly drawn to a hybrid approach that combined elements of the second and third options. Building something new while simultaneously using my investment position to address the strategic missteps at Vertex. The drive home took me past Vertex's headquarters, its upper floors still illuminated as the workday continued without me. For a moment, I felt a pang of loss, not just for my position, but for the teams I'd built and the projects we'd been developing. Then I reminded myself that while Marcus could take away my title, he couldn't take away the expertise and reputation I'd established. My downtown apartment felt unusually quiet as I set down the box of office belongings on my kitchen counter. For 8 years, my evenings had often been filled with work calls, review of project materials, or research for upcoming initiatives. Now, that structured purpose had vanished, leaving an unfamiliar emptiness. I poured a glass of wine and moved to my home office, where I kept a separate workspace for managing my family's investment activities. Opening my laptop, I began researching Vertex's recent market performance more thoroughly, analyzing investor reports and public filings with new perspective. The company had underperformed against projections for 2 consecutive quarters. Not dramatically, but enough to create concern among some analysts. The innovation pipeline my team had developed represented the most promising path to reversing this trend, with several major client solutions scheduled for rollout in the coming months. Greg's standardized service offerings approach might deliver short-term cost efficiencies, but it risked undermining the very differentiation that had fueled Vertex's growth. This wasn't just my subjective assessment. Market analysts had specifically cited Vertex's innovative, customized solutions as a key competitive advantage in a crowded consulting landscape. As I compiled this analysis, my phone began lighting up with messages from Vertex employees, team members, colleagues from other departments, even a few senior executives expressing shock at my termination and support for my contributions. The messages were heartening, but also revealed something significant. The decision to remove me had been closely held, with even VP-level leaders learning about it only after the fact. This suggested the move wasn't part of a broad, carefully considered strategic realignment, but rather a more isolated power play by Greg with Marcus's support. It also meant that many of Vertex's key leaders and team members might not fully support the new direction, information that could prove valuable in the coming weeks. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang with a call from Layla. "How are you holding?" "Up," she asked after I answered. "I'm processing. I replied truthfully. It's a significant adjustment after 8 years. The team is in shock, she reported. Greg held an all-hands meeting to announce exciting changes to our innovation approach. He talked about standardization and scalable methodologies, basically dismantling everything we've built. How did the team respond? I asked, curious about the immediate reaction. Publicly? Polite questions and concerned looks? Privately? At least 3 senior team members have already updated their LinkedIn profiles and reached out to contacts about opportunities elsewhere. This wasn't surprising, but was still disappointing to hear. The innovation team we'd built was exceptional. Diverse in background and thinking, collaborative in approach, and deeply committed to creating meaningful client impact. Dismantling that culture would have consequences beyond just my departure. What about you? I asked, concerned about Layla's position. I've been reassigned to Greg's office effective tomorrow, she said, unable to hide her dismay. Apparently, my institutional knowledge will be valuable during the transition. The move made strategic sense from Greg's perspective. Layla knew more about the innovation division's operations than anyone except me. But it also placed her in a difficult position professionally. You should do what's best for your career, I told her. Don't feel any obligation to me or to a vision that leadership no longer supports. That's just it, Layla replied. I believe in the approach we've developed. It works for clients in ways that standardized offerings never will. Whatever you decide to do next, I hope you'll keep me in mind. The vote of confidence was meaningful, especially coming from someone who had worked so closely with me and understood both my strengths and weaknesses. I appreciate that more than you know, I told her. I'm still figuring out next steps, but I'll definitely stay in touch. After we ended the call, I returned to my analysis with renewed focus. The conversations with Sophia, Michael, and Layla had helped crystallize my thinking. This wasn't just about responding to an unjust termination. It was about protecting an approach to innovation that genuinely served clients while creating opportunities for talented professionals who believed in that approach. By midnight, I had developed the outlines of a more specific plan. First, I would continue increasing Preston Holdings' ownership stake in Vertex to strengthen my position as a significant shareholder with legitimate interest in company governance. Second, I would establish an innovation consultancy focusing on the customized, transformative solutions that had proven so successful at Vertex, essentially continuing the work my team had been doing, but as an independent entity rather than an internal division. Third, and most importantly, I would use these parallel positions, significant investor and competitive innovator, to create leverage for influencing Vertex's strategic direction, either by demonstrating the market demand for our approach or by eventually using shareholder authority to challenge leadership decisions. The plan wasn't without risk. Building a new consultancy would require significant effort and investment, while increasing our position in Vertex would tie up more of Preston Holdings' capital in a single investment. Yet the potential rewards, both professional and financial, were substantial. As I finally prepared for bed, I found myself experiencing an unexpected emotion: gratitude. Had Marcus not terminated me so abruptly, I might have continued indefinitely within the constraints of corporate structure, my innovation approach increasingly compromised by Greg's standardization mandate. The dismissal, intended as rejection, had instead created the conditions for potential reinvention and greater impact. The next morning, I woke with clear purpose and direction. After 8 years of structured corporate routine, I now controlled my schedule completely. I used the morning to formalize my planning, creating detailed action items across 3 work streams. For Preston Holdings' investment strategy, I outlined a measured approach to increasing our Vertex ownership without triggering disclosure requirements prematurely. Michael would manage the execution, maintaining the separation between my personal identity and the investment firm's activities. For my potential consultancy, I developed initial concepts for positioning, service offerings, operational structure, and target clients. The vision that emerged was focused on transformative innovation for complex organizational challenges, precisely the high-value work that Greg was moving away from at Vertex. For my personal response to the termination, I worked with Sophia to review the separation agreement that had arrived overnight. As expected, it contained restrictive non-compete and non-solicitation provisions designed to prevent exactly what I was considering. "These terms are overly broad," Sophia noted during our morning call. "They're attempting to prevent you from working in any capacity related to technology consulting for 18 months, within 500 miles of any Vertex office. That would essentially bar you from your profession across most major markets." "Can we negotiate more reasonable terms?" I asked. "Absolutely. The restrictions need to be narrowly tailored to protect legitimate business interests. We'll counter with limited restrictions on soliciting current Vertex clients for 12 months, but no general prohibition on competing in the same industry." While Sophia prepared our response, I received an unexpected message from James Harrison, Vertex's chief financial officer and the longest-serving executive besides Marcus. He suggested meeting for coffee to discuss recent developments. James and I had always maintained a positive working relationship, though we operated in different domains of the business. His request for an off-site meeting so quickly after my termination was intriguing. We arranged to meet at a small cafe several blocks from Vertex headquarters. James arrived precisely on time, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, but looking uncharacteristically tense. "Thank you for meeting me," he said after we'd ordered. "I wanted to speak with you directly before rumors and corporate messaging obscured the reality of what happened." "I appreciate that," I replied, curious about his perspective. James glanced around before continuing in a lowered voice. "Your termination wasn't about performance or strategic alignment. It was about the Q3 forecast and Greg's influence." "Explain," I prompted, sensing important context I had missed. "We're tracking significantly below revenue projections for Q3, James revealed. The standardized service model Greg implemented in his divisions has improved margins but dramatically reduced new client acquisition and expansion opportunities. The board is getting nervous." This was valuable intelligence. As a public company, missing quarterly projections could impact Vertex's stock price and trigger increased scrutiny from investors, including larger shareholders like Preston Holdings. "Your innovation division was outperforming targets," James continued, which made the contrast with other divisions increasingly obvious. Instead of adapting his approach, Greg convinced Marcus that consolidating control and implementing standardization across all divisions would create consistency. "At the expense of growth," I noted. James nodded grimly. "The board only saw the presentation emphasizing margin improvements and operational efficiency. They don't understand that your customized innovation approach was driving most of our new business pipeline." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked directly. James hesitated before answering. "Because I've been with Vertex since the beginning, same as Marcus. I believe in what we built. This pivot toward corporate standardization at the expense of client-focused innovation is a mistake that could undermine years of work." The conversation provided crucial insight into the internal dynamics that had led to my termination. It wasn't just about Greg consolidating power, it was about controlling the narrative around company performance and justifying a strategic approach that was already showing signs of failure. After leaving James, I called Michael to discuss accelerating our investment position in light of this new information. "If they miss Q3 projections significantly, the stock will take a hit," I explained. "That creates both risk and opportunity for our position. We could pause our purchasing until after the quarterly announcement," Michael suggested. "No," I decided. "Let's continue as planned. If the stock drops after disappointing earnings, we'll increase our buying to take advantage of the lower price." The fundamentals of the business remain sound. It's the current leadership decisions that are creating the problem. By the end of the week, my path forward had crystallized into a clear three-phase strategy. The initial shock of termination had fully transformed into purposeful action, each step carefully designed to build toward a specific outcome. Phase 1 involved solidifying my financial position through Preston Holdings while negotiating favorable separation terms. Sophia had successfully pushed back against the most restrictive elements of the non-compete agreement, securing terms that would allow me to work in the industry, provided I didn't directly solicit current Vertex clients for 12 months. Phase 2 would focus on establishing my new consultancy, leveraging my reputation and methodologies to attract clients seeking the innovative approaches that Vertex was abandoning. I had already secured temporary office space and begun developing the business framework, including service offerings, operational structure, and initial marketing materials. Phase 3, the most strategic and potentially impactful, involved using my growing position as a Vertex shareholder to influence company direction, either through direct engagement with the board or by demonstrating the market demand for the innovation approach Greg was dismantling. As I finalized these plans, an email arrived from Layla, sent from her personal account rather than her Vertex address. The subject line read simply, "You should know about this." The attached document was an internal presentation titled Operational Realignment Initiative. Greg's plan for restructuring the innovation division I had built. Reading through it, I felt a mixture of vindication and concern. The plan essentially dismantled the customized solution approach, replacing it with standardized offerings categorized into fixed service tiers. More troublingly, it included a phased reduction in specialized innovation staff, with nearly 30% of the team classified as redundant under the new model. The human cost of this strategic pivot would be significant. Talented professionals, whose expertise in custom solution development was being devalued in favor of process standardization. Their potential departure represented not just personal disruption, but a substantial loss of intellectual capital for Vertex. The document confirmed what I had suspected. Greg wasn't just changing processes. He was fundamentally altering the value proposition that had fueled Vertex's growth. This approach might deliver short-term cost efficiencies, but it threatened the company's competitive differentiation and growth trajectory. I forwarded the document to Sophia, asking her to verify whether sharing this information violated any terms of my separation agreement. Her response was cautiously affirmative. While I couldn't use confidential information for competitive advantage, my status as a shareholder through Preston Holdings gave me legitimate interest in material business decisions affecting company value. This realization sparked an important addition to my strategy. As a significant shareholder, I had rights beyond just voting in board elections. If Preston Holdings continued increasing its ownership position, we could potentially file shareholder proposals, request meetings with board members, or even lead activist campaigns if the company's performance deteriorated due to mismanagement. The revelation transformed my thinking about the situation. What had begun as a personal professional setback was evolving into something far more significant, an opportunity to shape corporate governance and strategic direction through investment position rather than executive authority. As the first week after my termination concluded, I found myself in a state of focused determination, unlike anything I'd experienced before. The confusion and betrayal I'd felt walking out of Marcus's office had been replaced by clarity of purpose and strategic direction. For 8 years, I had channeled my creativity and intelligence into innovations that benefited Vertex Solutions, operating within corporate constraints and politics. Now those constraints were gone, but my knowledge, expertise, and industry connections remained intact, along with a growing ownership stake in the company that had discarded me. What Marcus didn't realize when he dismissed me from Vertex was that he hadn't ended my influence. He had merely changed its form. In the coming months, that influence would re-emerge in ways neither he nor Greg could have anticipated. Beginning with the subtle accumulation of company shares through Preston Holdings, and eventually culminating in a confrontation that would fundamentally reshape Vertex's future. As I closed my laptop that Friday evening, I felt something unexpected. Not resentment or anger, but a sense of liberation and possibility. The professional identity I had built over 8 years at Vertex hadn't been diminished by my termination. It had been set free from institutional constraints. And the financial resources I now controlled through Preston Holdings gave me leverage that no corporate title could match. Marcus had fired me believing he was removing an obstacle to his new vision for Vertex. What he would soon discover was that he had actually created something far more formidable, an independent force with the expertise, motivation, and increasingly, the financial position to challenge that vision at its foundation. The first week after my termination passed in a strange mixture of frenetic activity and unusual quiet. After 8 years of constant meetings, urgent client calls, and team management, the sudden absence of corporate demands created an unfamiliar space. I filled that space with purposeful action, transforming my dining room into a command center for planning my next moves. My mornings began with strategy sessions with Michael Chen from Preston Holdings, tracking our methodical acquisition of Vertex shares. We were careful to keep each purchase below thresholds that would trigger SEC disclosure requirements, gradually building our position without alerting Vertex's management to our activities. "We've reached 5% ownership," Michael reported, during our Thursday call, making us the second largest shareholder after Marcus himself. "Has there been any market reaction to my departure?" I asked, curious whether the news had affected stock performance. "Nothing significant yet," Michael replied. Vertex issued a brief statement about leadership transitions to align with strategic objectives, but analysts haven't focused on it. They're more concerned with the upcoming quarterly results. This matched James Harrison's information about potential Q3 disappointments. The market was waiting for concrete performance data rather than reacting to executive changes. While building our investment position, I was simultaneously developing the framework for my new consultancy. I had secured temporary office space in a downtown innovation hub, a glass-walled suite with views of the bay and room for a small initial team. The environment was energizing, surrounded by startups and creative agencies rather than corporate towers. On my third day there, I received an unexpected visitor. Eliza Rodriguez, a senior innovation strategist from my team at Vertex, appeared at my office door during lunch. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing around the minimalist space with its whiteboards already covered in business models and service frameworks. "Of course," I replied, genuinely pleased to see her. "How did you find me?" "Layla mentioned you'd taken space here," Eliza explained, setting down her bag. "I hope that's okay. I wanted to talk to you directly, away from corporate surveillance." Her choice of words was telling. Corporate surveillance suggested the atmosphere at Vertex had changed dramatically in just 1 week. "Things are moving quickly," Eliza continued, not waiting for me to ask. "Greg has already reassigned half the innovation team to standardization work streams. We're being asked to document all our methodologies and client-specific approaches for integration into the new service framework. They're harvesting your knowledge before implementing the restructuring," I observed. Eliza nodded grimly. "The Nakamura project was reassigned yesterday. Our most innovative work reduced to a Tier 3 standardized solution package. The client is already expressing concerns about whether their specific needs will be addressed. The Nakamura project had been a showcase of our customized approach, a complex solution for a multinational electronics manufacturer with unique supply chain challenges. Forcing it into a standardized service tier would inevitably compromise its effectiveness." "I didn't come just to update you," Eliza said, straightening her posture. "I came to find out what you're planning next. 7 of us from the innovation team met last night. We all agree that the direction Greg is taking isn't just wrong for us professionally, it's wrong for clients and ultimately wrong for Vertex." Her directness didn't surprise me. Eliza had always been forthright, which made her an exceptional Innovation strategist, willing to challenge assumptions and advocate for better approaches. I'm launching my own consultancy, I told her, gesturing to the planning boards around us, focused on the same principles of customized innovation that we developed at Vertex but without corporate constraints. Eliza studied the frameworks on the whiteboards, her expression brightening. This is what we believe in, what we know works for complex client challenges. The question is timing, I continued. I'm bound by certain restrictions in my separation. Agreement regarding client solicitation, though Sophia managed to negotiate reasonable terms. I'll need to build this methodically. What if you had a team ready to join you? Eliza asked directly. People who already understand the methodologies and share your vision for client-centered innovation? The implication was clear. Eliza wasn't just gathering information, she was representing a group of innovation team members considering their options as Vertex's direction shifted. I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about who might be the right fit for this new venture, I admitted. But I need to be careful about solicitation restrictions. If people choose to leave Vertex independently and later express interest in opportunities here, that's different from me actively recruiting. Eliza nodded, understanding the legal nuances. And what about clients? Many of them specifically sought out Vertex because of your innovation approach. When they discover that approach is being dismantled. The same principle applies, I explained. I can't solicit current Vertex clients for 12 months, but if they independently seek alternatives after experiencing the new standardized approach, that's their business decision. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the boundaries between legitimate information sharing and potential agreement violations. When Eliza finally prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Whatever you're building here, I believe in it, she said simply. So do the others. We'll make our own decisions about our futures at Vertex, but it's good to know there might be alternatives that align with what we actually believe in. After she left, I reflected on the implications of our conversation. The dissatisfaction within the innovation team represented both opportunity and responsibility. The chance to build something meaningful with talented professionals who shared my vision, coupled with the obligation to ensure any transitions happened legally and ethically. The next morning, I met with Diana Powell, a branding consultant I'd worked with during my time at Vertex. We were discussing identity development for my new venture, temporarily called Catalyst Innovation Partners. The name works, but we need to refine the positioning, Diana advised, reviewing my draft materials. You're not just offering innovation consulting, you're providing transformation through customized approaches that standardized services can't match. That differentiation should be central to your identity. As we developed the branding concept, my phone buzzed with a message from James Harrison. Quarterly forecast revised downward. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow. Thought you should know. The timing was significant. Vertex was clearly acknowledging the performance issues James had mentioned earlier, and sooner than the regular reporting cycle would have required. This suggested the situation might be worse than initially indicated. I immediately called Michael to discuss implications for our investment strategy. If they announce revised projections publicly, the stock will take a hit, Michael noted. Depending on the magnitude, it could be substantial. Which creates opportunity, I replied. If we believe the underlying business remains sound despite current management decisions, a price drop allows us to increase our position more affordably. I'll prepare additional capital, Michael agreed. We can move quickly if the announcement triggers significant selling pressure. The following day brought the news we had anticipated. Vertex issued a press release revising quarterly revenue projections downward by 18%, citing integration challenges with standardized service implementation and temporary disruption during strategic realignment. The market response was immediate and severe. Vertex shares dropped nearly 15% in morning trading as investors reacted to both the disappointing projections and the concerning language about implementation challenges. Following our prepared strategy, Preston Holdings began systematically increasing our position, acquiring shares at the reduced price. By the end of the trading day, we had increased our ownership to nearly 12%, taking advantage of the temporary devaluation. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Reed himself. "Emily," he began without preamble when I answered, "I think we should talk." The call was surprising but not entirely unexpected. The significant stock drop in Preston Holdings' continued acquisition of shares, though he wouldn't know about the latter yet, created pressure that inevitably led back to the strategic decisions that had precipitated my termination. "What would you like to discuss?" I asked neutrally. "The transition in the innovation division has been more disruptive than anticipated," Marcus admitted, his tone carefully measured. "Some key clients are expressing concerns about changes to their service models. That seems consistent with the revised projections announced today," I observed. Marcus paused before continuing. "We're considering adjustments to the implementation timeline for standardization. The board has suggested bringing in a consultant to help manage the transition more effectively." The irony wasn't lost on me. Having terminated me for opposing standardization, Marcus was now floating the possibility of hiring me back as a consultant to implement it more smoothly. "That's an interesting proposition," I replied. "However, I've already begun developing new professional opportunities that align more closely with my approach to innovation." "We could make it worth your while," Marcus pressed. "A 6-month consulting engagement with significant compensation. It would provide continuity for clients, while allowing us to refine the standardization model." "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I don't believe the issue is implementation timeline or transition management. It's the fundamental premise that complex client challenges can be adequately addressed through standardized service tiers. That misalignment can't be resolved through consulting adjustments." Marcus's tone hardened slightly. "The standardization initiative represents significant investment and board commitment. We're not changing direction, just looking for more effective implementation." "Then I'm afraid I can't help you," I replied honestly. "I'd be doing both Vertex and its clients a disservice by facilitating an approach I fundamentally believe is misaligned with their needs." After a moment of silence, Marcus shifted topics unexpectedly. "I understand you've maintained contact with several Vertex employees since your departure." The statement carried an implicit warning about non-solicitation provisions in my separation agreement. "I've had personal conversations with colleagues I've known for years," I replied carefully. "Nothing that violates the terms we negotiated." "Just be mindful of the boundaries," Marcus advised. "Vertex will protect its interests vigorously if those terms are breached." The thinly veiled threat confirmed something important. Marcus was feeling pressure from the market reaction and client concerns, enough to both reach out about potential consulting and issue warnings about enforcement of separation terms. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Sophia to document the conversation and ensure we remained on solid legal ground regarding any communications with former colleagues. Her assessment was reassuring. Personal conversations were perfectly acceptable provided I wasn't actively recruiting or encouraging departures. The following week brought another significant development. Layla forwarded an internal email announcing the departure of 3 senior members of the innovation team, including Eliza Rodriguez. The message from HR framed these as personal career decisions, while assuring staff that the strategic realignment would continue as planned. 2 days later, I received emails from all 3 departed team members, expressing interest in exploring professional opportunities with my new venture. I arranged to meet them at a cafe near my temporary office, careful to document that they had initiated contact following their voluntary departures from Vertex. The situation deteriorated rapidly after the quarterly revision, Eliza explained. When we met, Greg began pushing even harder for documentation of all our methodologies, while simultaneously reducing team autonomy and client contact. The Nakamura project was the breaking point for me, added Jason Chen, who had been the lead strategist on that account. When they standardized the solution despite explicit client requirements for customization, I knew it was time to leave. The third departed team member, Renee Washington, had been responsible for analytics and measurement frameworks. "They're dismantling everything that made our approach effective," she said, replacing insight with process, client alignment with efficiency metrics. All three represented exceptional talent, professionals who deeply understood the innovation, methodology we had developed and were committed to client-centered approaches. Their interest in joining my new venture was both validating and energizing. After carefully reviewing non-compete restrictions in their separation agreements, which were less restrictive than mine, I formally offered all three positions with Catalyst Innovation Partners. They would form the core leadership team as we built the consultancy, bringing complementary skills and shared commitment to our approach. With a founding team in place, Catalyst's development accelerated rapidly. We secured proper office space, developed comprehensive service offerings, and began building our market presence through thought leadership and targeted networking. While direct solicitation of Vertex clients remained off-limits, we could establish ourselves as a distinctive alternative in the innovation consulting space. Meanwhile, Preston Holdings continued its strategic acquisition of Vertex shares. Following the quarterly projection announcement and subsequent stock drop, we had increased our position to nearly 14% ownership, making us unquestionably the second-largest shareholder after Marcus. 3 weeks after my termination, a formal SEC filing made this position public knowledge for the first time. The disclosure identified Preston Holdings as the purchasing entity, but didn't connect it to me personally. That relationship remained confidential through the legal structure of the family investment firm. The day after the filing, James Harrison requested another off-site meeting. "The board is asking questions about this Preston Holdings that's accumulated a significant position," he explained when we met. "Marcus is particularly concerned about potential activist intentions given the timing right after our disappointing quarterly projection." "That seems like a reasonable concern from his perspective," I acknowledged neutrally. "Has anyone from Preston Holdings reached out to Vertex management?" "Not yet," James replied. "But some board members are researching the firm, trying to understand their investment strategy and intentions." This intelligence was valuable. It confirmed that Vertex leadership was aware of Preston Holdings' position, but hadn't yet connected it to me. That connection would eventually become clear, but timing was strategic. For now, maintaining separation between my new consultancy and my investment position provided important flexibility. The following week brought another development that accelerated my timeline. The Nakamura Corporation, Vertex's client whose project had been standardized against their preferences, announced they were evaluating strategic partnerships for innovation, initiatives, corporate language for exploring alternative service providers. As Jason had predicted, the standardization approach was creating client dissatisfaction, especially among those with complex challenges that required customized solutions. While I couldn't directly solicit Nakamura's business due to my separation agreement, their public statement about seeking alternatives created potential opportunity within legal boundaries. I decided to accelerate Catalyst's market positioning, launching our website and publishing a thought leadership piece on the customization imperative in complex innovation challenges, a clear articulation of our philosophy that directly countered Vertex's standardization approach without mentioning them specifically. The article gained significant traction in industry publications and social media, positioning Catalyst as a distinctive voice in the innovation consulting space. More importantly, it articulated an alternative philosophy precisely when clients like Nakamura were actively seeking such alternatives. 5 weeks after my termination, Catalyst Innovation Partners was fully operational with our core team of 4 established innovation leaders and infrastructure to support initial client engagements. While we couldn't yet approach Vertex clients directly, we were building recognition within the industry as a specialized firm focused on complex innovation challenges requiring customized approaches. Simultaneously, Preston Holdings had increased its ownership position in Vertex to 15.5%, approaching the threshold that would require additional SEC disclosures and potentially trigger shareholder rights provisions in Vertex's corporate bylaws. The parallel tracks were developing exactly as planned, building a viable business alternative while establishing investment leverage to potentially influence Vertex's strategic direction. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly these tracks would converge. The catalyst came in the form of an industry conference where both Vertex and several of its major clients would be participating. While I had declined an invitation to speak, avoiding direct competition with Vertex in such a public forum, Eliza would be representing Catalyst on a panel about emerging approaches to innovation challenges. The evening before the conference, I received an urgent call from Michael Chen at Preston Holdings. "We've received a letter from Vertex's corporate counsel," he reported. "They're requesting information about our investment intentions and asking for a meeting with Preston Holdings management." This was a significant development. Vertex was making direct contact with what they believed was simply an investment firm accumulating their stock. How I responded would determine whether my connection to Preston Holdings became public knowledge sooner than planned. "Who signed the letter?" I asked, considering options. "Marcus Reed personally," Michael replied. "He's requesting a meeting next week to discuss mutual interests in Vertex's strategic direction." The timing suggested Marcus was trying to understand Preston Holdings' intentions before the industry conference, where client relationships might be in play. It created an opportunity I hadn't expected quite so soon. "Schedule the meeting," I decided, "but not for next week. Tomorrow morning, before the conference begins." "Tomorrow?" Michael sounded surprised. "Are you sure that's enough time to prepare?" "I've been preparing for this meeting since the day Marcus terminated me," I replied with newfound clarity. "It's time for him to discover exactly who has been buying his company." The following morning, I dressed with particular care, choosing a sharp charcoal suit that projected confidence and authority. As I prepared for what would be a pivotal confrontation, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 6 weeks. What had begun as a professional crisis, an unexpected termination after 8 years of commitment, had transformed into something entirely different. The very decision intended to remove my influence had instead created the conditions for a different kind of impact, one based not on corporate title but on investment position and market alternative. I arrived at Vertex headquarters precisely on time for the 8:30 a.m. meeting, asking the receptionist to inform Marcus Reed that the representative from Preston Holdings is here as requested. The careful wording maintained the separation until the moment of revelation. While waiting, I noticed several curious glances from employees who recognized me. My presence in the lobby just 6 weeks after termination created obvious questions. I maintained professional composure, acknowledging familiar faces with polite nods while giving nothing away about my purpose. When Marcus's assistant appeared to escort me to the conference room, her expression revealed momentary confusion before professional training took over. "Ms. Preston, I wasn't expecting," she began before collecting herself. "Mr. Reed is waiting in the main conference room. Please follow me." The executive floor appeared unchanged since my departure, though I noticed subtle differences in atmosphere, less spontaneous collaboration, more formal interactions. Greg Parsons was visible through his office glass wall, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. The main conference room door was closed. Marcus's assistant knocked once before opening it, announcing simply, "Your appointment from Preston Holdings is here, Mr. Reed?" I stepped into the room to find Marcus seated at the head of the conference table, flanked by James Harrison and a woman I recognized as Vertex's corporate counsel. Their expressions as I entered told the entire story, initial confusion giving way to dawning realization and, in Marcus's case, poorly concealed alarm. "Emily," Marcus managed after a moment of stunned silence. "We were expecting representatives from Preston Holdings." "I am the representative from Preston Holdings," I replied calmly, taking a seat across from them. "More accurately, I'm the managing trustee of the family investment firm founded by my grandfather. Preston is my mother's maiden name." The revelation landed with palpable impact. Marcus glanced at the corporate counsel, whose expression had turned grave as she processed the implications. "So the 5% ownership position," James began, understanding immediately, "was acquired under my direction following my termination," I confirmed, making Preston Holdings, and by extension me, Vertex's second-largest shareholder after Marcus himself. The corporate counsel recovered first, her professional training asserting itself. "This meeting was requested to discuss investment intentions, not to revisit personnel decisions." "The two are inseparably connected," I countered. "Preston Holdings has accumulated a significant position in Vertex because I believe in the company's potential that is being systematically undermined by the standardization strategy implemented after my departure." Marcus had regained his composure, his expression hardening into the calculated neutrality I recognized from our last interaction. "Your termination was a business decision based on strategic alignment. This seems like an elaborate and expensive way to contest that decision." "This isn't about my termination," I clarified. "It's about protecting investment value. Preston Holdings has committed substantial capital to Vertex because we believe in its potential for growth and innovation. The current standardization strategy threatens that potential, as evidenced by the revised quarterly projections and client dissatisfaction." James glanced at Marcus, his expression revealing something important. The CFO had been making similar arguments internally, without success. "The strategic realignment is proceeding according to plan," Marcus stated firmly. "Initial implementation. Challenges are expected with any significant change initiative." "Are client departures also expected?" I asked pointedly. "Because Nakamura Corporation is actively exploring alternative partners, and they're unlikely to be the last." The mention of Nakamura visibly unsettled Marcus. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to have such specific knowledge of client relationships post-termination. "As a significant shareholder," I continued, "Preston Holdings is deeply concerned about strategic decisions that appear to be driving client dissatisfaction and threatening revenue stability. We're considering options to protect our investment, including requesting board representation to ensure shareholder interests are properly considered in strategic decisions." The statement represented a significant escalation. The first, explicit mention of using our shareholder position to influence governance. The corporate counsel leaned over to whisper something to Marcus, likely regarding the legal implications of such a move. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked. After a moment, his tone more measured. "Preston Holdings believes Vertex's competitive advantage lies in its customized innovation approach for complex client challenges. The very approach being dismantled under the current strategy," I explained. "We're prepared to use our position as a major shareholder to advocate for preserving that advantage, either through existing governance channels or more direct intervention if necessary." The implied threat of a proxy fight or other shareholder action hung in the air. With over 15% ownership, Preston Holdings had legitimate standing to pursue such options if management decisions continued to threaten company value. Alternatively, I continued, we could discuss a more collaborative approach, one that better balances operational efficiency with the customized innovation that built Vertex's reputation and client relationships. The meeting continued for nearly an hour, evolving from initial confrontation to tense negotiation. Marcus attempted several times to separate my personal history with the company from Preston Holdings' investment position, but the connection was undeniable. My unique understanding of Vertex's operations and client relationships informed our investment thesis and concerns. As the discussion concluded, Marcus made a final observation that revealed much about his perspective. "This is quite the chess move, Emily, using financial leverage where corporate authority failed." "It's not a game, Marcus," I replied, gathering my materials. "It's about protecting value. Both investment value for Preston Holdings and service value for clients who need more than standardized offerings. The question is whether Vertex's leadership is willing to recognize that reality before more damage is done." Leaving Vertex headquarters that morning, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The revelation of my connection to Preston Holdings had fundamentally altered the power dynamic between us. Marcus had terminated me believing he was removing an obstacle to his strategic vision. Now he understood that decision had inadvertently created a different kind of challenge, one with financial leverage and market alternatives that couldn't be dismissed with a manila envelope and severance package. The real work was just beginning. Building Catalyst Innovation Partners into a viable alternative while using Preston Holdings' investment position to influence Vertex's direction would require careful navigation of legal boundaries and strategic timing. But for the first time, since my termination, the path forward was clear. Not as an employee seeking to reclaim position, but as an investor and entrepreneur, creating leverage through parallel tracks of influence. As I headed directly to the industry conference where Eliza would be representing Catalyst, I reflected on how profoundly my professional identity had evolved in just 6 weeks. What Marcus had intended as rejection had instead become the catalyst for reinvention, transforming me from a corporate executive constrained by organizational politics into an independent force with multiple avenues of impact. The journey ahead would bring new challenges and opportunities, but one thing was certain: the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Marcus had fired me believing he was asserting control. Now he would navigate the consequences of discovering I was the anonymous investor methodically acquiring his company. The industry conference buzzed with energy as I made my way through the crowded exhibition hall. After my meeting with Marcus, I felt an unusual sense of liberation. The secrecy surrounding my connection to Preston Holdings had been maintained for strategic reasons. But there was something powerful about finally revealing the truth. The shocked expressions on Marcus and his team's faces had been validation of a strategy carefully executed over the past 6 weeks. I slipped into the back of a presentation room where Eliza was participating in a panel discussion titled Beyond Standardization: Custom Approaches for Complex Innovation Challenges. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. While Marcus was still processing the revelation about Preston Holdings, Catalyst Innovation Partners was publicly positioning itself as the philosophical counterpoint to Vertex's standardization strategy. Eliza was magnetic on stage, articulating our core philosophy with precision and passion. Innovation isn't a standardized process that can be replicated identically across different organizational contexts, she explained to the attentive audience. True transformation requires understanding the unique cultural, structural, and strategic elements of each client's reality, then designing approaches that work with those elements rather than imposing external frameworks. A Vertex representative was also on the panel, Derek Morris, a mid-level director who had recently been promoted under Greg's restructuring. His discomfort was evident as he attempted to defend standardization, while Eliza systematically dismantled its premises with specific examples and client outcomes. Our structured approach ensures consistent quality and predictable delivery, Derek insisted, falling back on the talking points I recognized from Greg's presentations. At what cost to effectiveness? Eliza countered. Complex challenges require adaptive solutions. When we force unique client needs into standardized processes, we sacrifice impact for procedural consistency. From my position at the back of the room, I noticed several attendees nodding in agreement with Eliza's points. More significantly, I recognized representatives from 3 major Vertex clients: all taking detailed notes and exchanging glances during the philosophical clash playing out on stage. After the panel concluded, I watched as those same client representatives approached Eliza, engaging in animated conversation. While I couldn't hear the specifics, their body language suggested genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. Seeds were being planted, not through direct solicitation, but through the natural attraction of a philosophy that better aligned with their needs. As the conference continued throughout the day, word of my morning meeting with Marcus spread through industry networks. Several former colleagues approached me with knowing smiles or questioning glances, clearly having heard rumors about Preston Holdings. I maintained professional discretion, neither confirming nor denying specific details. But the shift in how people engaged with me was noticeable, from sympathetic former executive to intriguing strategic player. By late afternoon, my phone displayed a message from James Harrison. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Marcus briefed directors about Preston Holdings' revelation. They're concerned about potential activist intentions. Rapid escalation to board level confirmed what I had anticipated. My dual position as significant investor and competing entrepreneur created leverage that couldn't be ignored. Vertex's governance structures were being activated to address what leadership perceived as a potential threat to control. That evening, Eliza, Jason, Renee, and I gathered at Catalyst's new offices to debrief on the conference and plan our next steps. The energy was electric, a stark contrast to the political caution that had characterized our final months at Vertex. 3 potential clients approached me after the panel, Eliza reported excitedly, including Nakamura's VP of Strategy. He specifically mentioned their dissatisfaction with Vertex's standardized approach to their project. What did you tell him? I asked, mindful of our legal boundaries. Exactly what we agreed, that while we can't directly discuss Vertex, client relationships, we're always open to conversations about innovation approaches for complex challenges. He's scheduled a hypothetical discussion for next week. The development was significant. Nakamura's interest represented potential validation of our business model and further pressure on Vertex's standardization strategy. If a flagship client, like Nakamura, were to transition away from Vertex, it would send ripples throughout the industry and likely trigger serious questions from Vertex's board about the strategic direction. What about your meeting with Marcus? Jason asked, turning the conversation to the day's biggest development. Is it true Preston Holdings is actually your family's firm? I nodded, sharing the highlights of the morning confrontation. The I connection is now explicit. Marcus understands that his decision to terminate me inadvertently created a significant shareholder with both intimate knowledge of company operations and philosophical opposition to the current strategy. What happens next? Renee asked, always focused on practical implications. Vertex has 2 basic options, I explained. They can fight, treating Preston Holdings as a hostile influence and attempting to neutralize our leverage through various governance mechanisms. Or they can negotiate, recognizing the legitimacy of our concerns and exploring potential compromise on strategic direction. Based on your history with Marcus, which do you expect? Jason asked. Initially, resistance, I predicted. Marcus and Greg have invested significant political capital in the standardization strategy. Abandoning it would require acknowledging a fundamental misjudgment. But as client dissatisfaction grows and financial implications become clearer, practical considerations may outweigh pride. Our planning session continued late into the evening, mapping potential scenarios and response strategies. The dual tracks we had established, building Catalyst while leveraging Preston Holdings' position, were creating reinforcing pressure. Each client conversation that questioned standardization strengthened our investment argument about strategic missteps, while our significant ownership position gave those arguments weight beyond typical market criticism. The following morning brought confirmation of my prediction about initial resistance. James texted, Board aligned behind Marcus for now. Authorizing defensive measures against hostile investor action. PR statement being prepared about commitment to strategic direction despite short-term challenges. The response was predictable, but ultimately self-defeating. By doubling down on a strategy already showing signs of failure, Vertex's leadership was creating additional exposure to market criticism and client dissatisfaction. More importantly, they were misdiagnosing the nature of our position. Preston Holdings wasn't a typical activist investor seeking short-term financial engineering, but a knowledgeable shareholder with legitimate concerns about fundamental business strategy. I decided to give their position time to evolve naturally, rather than forcing immediate confrontation. The next phase of our strategy involved demonstrating the market validity of our approach through actual client engagements, providing concrete evidence that the customized innovation philosophy abandoned by Vertex represented significant business value. That opportunity came more quickly than anticipated. 2 days after the conference, Nakamura Corporation announced they were terminating their relationship with Vertex Solutions, effective immediately. The press release cited strategic realignment of innovation partnerships, corporate language that obscured the straightforward reality. They were unhappy with the standardized approach that had replaced the customized solution I had originally designed for them. The market reaction was immediate. Vertex shares dropped nearly 8% on the news, reflecting investor concern about both the specific client loss and its potential implications for other relationships. More significantly, Nakamura's VP of Strategy reached out directly to Catalyst Innovation Partners, requesting a formal meeting to discuss potential engagement. The timing created a delicate legal situation. While Nakamura had independently terminated their relationship with Vertex, making them technically a former rather than current client, the proximity to my termination required careful navigation of non-solicitation provisions. I consulted with Sophia immediately. "This is permissible with appropriate documentation," she advised after reviewing the facts. Nakamura terminated their relationship with Vertex independently before contacting Catalyst. "As long as you maintain clear records showing they initiated contact following their decision to leave Vertex, you're on solid ground." With legal clearance established, we prepared for the Nakamura meeting with meticulous care. This would be Catalyst's first major client opportunity, a chance to demonstrate our approach not just conceptually, but through practical application to their complex challenges. The meeting exceeded even our optimistic expectations. Nakamura's team arrived with comprehensive documentation of their innovation needs and explicit frustration with Vertex's standardized approach. "We selected Vertex originally because of the customized framework you designed for our unique supply chain challenges," their VP of Strategy explained. "When that was replaced with a standardized service tier that ignored our specific requirements, the value proposition disappeared." Over 4 hours, we developed the framework for a potential engagement that would resurrect the customized approach while enhancing it with new elements developed at Catalyst. The philosophical alignment was evident throughout the discussion. Both organizations recognized that effective innovation required tailored solutions rather than standardized processes. By the meeting's conclusion, Nakamura had committed to a 3-month initial engagement with potential for expansion. Catalyst Innovation Partners had secured its first major client, a former Vertex flagship account that had departed specifically because of the standardization strategy I had opposed. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone involved, including industry observers who quickly noted the connection. Tech Strategy, a leading industry publication, ran an analysis piece titled, "Vertex Loses Key Client to Former Executive's New Venture," explicitly linking Nakamura's departure to the philosophical shift following my termination. The article sent ripples through Vertex's client base and shareholder community. 2 additional clients requested meetings with Vertex leadership to discuss concerns about the standardization initiative, while several investment analysts issued updated recommendations expressing skepticism about the strategic direction. The combined pressure, client departures, negative market response, and Preston Holdings' significant ownership position created the conditions for the next phase of our strategy. Rather than waiting for Vertex's board to reach out, I decided to initiate contact from a position of strengthened leverage. Through Michael Chen, Preston Holdings sent a formal letter to Vertex's board of directors requesting a special meeting to discuss strategic concerns affecting shareholder value. The letter specifically cited Nakamura's departure and subsequent engagement with Catalyst as evidence of market rejection of the standardization approach, while emphasizing Preston Holdings' long-term interest in Vertex's sustainable success. As the company's second-largest shareholder, Preston Holdings has both the right and responsibility to address strategic decisions that threaten value creation, the letter stated. We request the opportunity to present an alternative vision that better balances operational efficiency with the customized innovation approach that built Vertex's market position. The letter represented a significant escalation, moving from private confrontation with Marcus to formal engagement with the full board. By framing our concerns in terms of shareholder value rather than personal vindication, we established legitimate grounds for intervention that directors had fiduciary responsibility to consider. The board's response came 3 days later, agreeing to a special meeting the following week. More tellingly, the communication came directly from the lead independent director rather than Marcus, suggesting a potential shift in internal dynamics. The board was creating distance between its governance responsibilities and management's strategic decisions, a subtle but important indication that directors were taking our concerns seriously. In preparation for this crucial meeting, I worked with Catalyst's team to develop a comprehensive presentation addressing both the philosophical and financial aspects of our position. The core argument was straightforward. Vertex's competitive advantage had always been its ability to deliver customized innovation solutions for complex client challenges. The standardization strategy undermined this differentiation without delivering compensating benefits in efficiency or scalability. More powerfully, we now had concrete evidence supporting this argument. Nakamura's departure and subsequent engagement with Catalyst demonstrated real market preference for the customized approach. This wasn't speculative criticism, but validated client behavior with material financial implications. The night before the board meeting, I received an unexpected call from James Harrison. "I thought you should know the dynamics going into tomorrow," he said, his voice low despite being outside the office. "The board is divided. 3 directors are questioning the standardization strategy based on client departures and market response. 2 remain firmly aligned with Marcus. The remaining 2 are wavering, concerned about both the strategic direction and the potential for disruptive shareholder action." "And you?" I asked, curious about his personal position given our history of candid information sharing. James sighed audibly. "I've presented the financial implications objectively. The numbers speak for themselves. Client retention is declining. New business acquisition is down 22% since implementation began, and operational savings from standardization are not offsetting revenue impacts. As CFO, my responsibility is to ensure the board understands these realities." The intelligence was valuable, providing insight into board dynamics that would inform my approach to the meeting. The division James described suggested an opportunity to build consensus around a modified strategy rather than forcing a confrontational governance challenge. "One more thing," James added before ending the call. "Greg has been meeting privately with several board members, characterizing your actions as personal vendetta rather than legitimate shareholder concern. Be prepared to address that narrative directly." The warning was timely. Greg's attempt to personalize the conflict rather than engaging with its substantive business implications was a predictable defensive tactic. By framing Preston Holdings' actions as emotionally motivated rather than financially justified, he hoped to undermine our credibility with directors. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Vertex's headquarters, a home field advantage for management that I accepted without objection. Psychological elements like meeting location were ultimately insignificant compared to the substance of our position and the leverage created by Preston Holdings' ownership stake. I arrived 30 minutes early, accompanied by Michael Chen, who would represent Preston Holdings' investment perspective while I addressed strategic and operational considerations. As we waited in the reception area, I noticed Marcus and Greg walking together toward the executive elevator, engaged in intense conversation. Neither acknowledged my presence, a small but telling indication of the emotional undercurrent beneath the formal governance proceedings. At precisely 10 a.m., the board secretary escorted us to the main boardroom, where 9 people were already seated around the polished conference table, 7 directors, Marcus, and the corporate counsel. The atmosphere was palpably tense, with directors' expressions ranging from open curiosity to guarded neutrality. The lead independent director, Catherine Wilson, opened the meeting with formal introductions before establishing ground rules for the discussion. We've allocated 60 minutes for Preston Holdings to present its perspective, followed by 30 minutes for management response and board questions, she explained. Our objective is to understand all viewpoints regarding Vertex's strategic direction and potential implications for shareholder value. The structure was fair, providing adequate time to present our case while maintaining appropriate governance boundaries. I began by directly addressing the narrative Greg had been promoting privately. Before discussing specific strategic concerns, I want to acknowledge the unique circumstances of this meeting, I said, making eye contact with each director. Preston Holdings' investment in Vertex began after my termination as Chief Innovation Officer. While this timing creates an apparent personal dimension, our position is fundamentally about business strategy and shareholder value, not individual grievances. Several directors nodded appreciatively at this direct approach. By acknowledging the potential perception of personal motivation while reframing the discussion around legitimate business concerns, I established credibility that would be difficult for Greg to undermine. For the next 50 minutes, Michael and I presented a comprehensive analysis of Vertex's strategic direction, balancing respectful criticism with constructive alternatives. We detailed the market evidence against standardization, including client departures, declining new business acquisition, and emerging competitive alternatives, including but not limited to Catalyst. Most powerfully, we presented financial projections, comparing the current strategy's outcomes with a modified approach that preserved customization for complex client needs, while implementing standardization where genuinely appropriate. The fundamental flaw in the current strategy isn't standardization itself, I explained, but its universal application regardless of client requirements. Complex innovation challenges require customized approaches. By forcing these into standardized frameworks, Vertex is sacrificing its core competitive advantage without gaining compensating benefits. Throughout the presentation, I observed the directors' reactions carefully. 3 were taking detailed notes and nodding at key points, suggesting alignment with our perspective. 2 maintained carefully neutral expressions, revealing nothing about their positions. The remaining 2 showed occasional skepticism, particularly during discussions of implementation feasibility. Marcus sat stone-faced throughout, while Greg alternated between scribbling notes and whispering to the corporate counsel. Neither interrupted or objected during our presentation, a professional courtesy that reflected the formal governance context rather than personal agreement. When we concluded, Catherine thanked us for the comprehensive analysis before turning to Marcus. Management will now have 30 minutes to respond to these concerns and present their perspective on the standardization strategy. Marcus began with a measured defense of the strategic direction, emphasizing operational efficiencies and scalability benefits while acknowledging implementation challenges that have temporarily affected client relationships. Greg followed, with more pointed comments, characterizing our position as fundamentally misunderstanding the long-term vision and prioritizing short-term client preferences over sustainable business models. Neither directly addressed the concrete financial implications we had presented or the specific client departures that validated our concerns. Instead, they focused on theoretical benefits that would supposedly materialize once the transition period was complete, a time frame they notably declined to specify when questioned by directors. As the management response concluded, Catherine opened the floor for board questions. The ensuing discussion revealed the divisions James had described, with directors split between those focused on client impact and those prioritizing operational considerations. The most significant moment came when a director named Robert Chen, previously aligned with Marcus according to James's intelligence, asked a pivotal question. If standardization remains the core strategy but is modified to preserve customization, for certain complex client needs, how would that affect both operational efficiency and client retention? The question created an opening for compromise, a middle path between complete reversal and stubborn persistence. Before Marcus or Greg could respond with dismissal, I seized the opportunity. That's precisely the balance we're advocating, I replied. Standardization offers genuine benefits for routine service delivery. The issue is its application to complex innovation challenges that require customized approaches. A differentiated strategy that applies the right methodology to the right client need would preserve Vertex's competitive advantage while capturing appropriate efficiencies. Several directors nodded thoughtfully at this framing, recognizing the potential for resolution that preserved strategic progress while addressing legitimate concerns. Marcus appeared to recognize the shifting dynamics, adjusting his position subtly. We've always intended to make appropriate adjustments based on client feedback, he claimed, contradicting his previous insistence on comprehensive standardization. Perhaps the implementation timeline requires recalibration to better manage the transition. The concession, however minor, represented the first crack in management's defensive posture. By the meeting's conclusion, the board had established a special committee of 3 directors to evaluate strategic refinements that balance standardization benefits with customized approaches for complex client needs. Diplomatic language. For a significant potential shift in direction. As Michael and I prepared to leave, Catherine approached privately. That was impressively substantive, she said quietly. Most activist interventions focus on financial engineering rather than fundamental business strategy. The board appreciates the thoughtful approach, regardless of where this ultimately leads. The comment confirmed what I had sensed throughout. The meeting, directors were responding to the legitimacy of our concerns rather than dismissing them as personally motivated. By focusing consistently on shareholder value and client impact rather than individual vindication, Preston Holdings had established credibility that transcended my personal history with the company. Walking out of Vertex headquarters that afternoon, I felt a profound shift in the dynamic. What had begun as a termination based on strategic misalignment had evolved into a governance-level reconsideration of that very strategy. The leverage created by Preston Holdings' investment position, combined with market validation through Catalyst's early success, had transformed me from dismissed executive to influential stakeholder with legitimate voice in company direction. More significantly, the dual tracks we had established, building Catalyst while influencing Vertex, through investment position, were proving mutually reinforcing. Each client who selected our customized approach validated the market thesis underlying our criticism of Vertex's strategy, while our shareholder engagement created industry visibility that accelerated Catalyst's growth. As I headed directly to Catalyst's offices to update our team on the board meeting, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 8 weeks. What Marcus had intended as rejection had instead become catalyst for reinvention, transforming me from constrained corporate executive into independent entrepreneur and investor with expanded impact potential. The path forward remained uncertain, with multiple possible outcomes from Vertex's strategic reconsideration. But regardless of those specific results, the fundamental transformation was already complete. I had redefined my professional identity and impact beyond institutional validation or constraint. Where termination had initially seemed like ending, it had ultimately revealed itself as beginning. The liberation needed to build something more aligned with both market needs and personal values. The next 4 weeks unfolded with extraordinary momentum on both fronts of our strategy. Catalyst Innovation Partners secured 2 additional client engagements beyond Nakamura, both organizations seeking the customized innovation approach that Vertex had abandoned. Our team expanded from the founding 4 to 11 professionals, including 3 more former Vertex innovation specialists who had departed voluntarily after experiencing the standardization approach. Our new office space hummed with creative energy that reminded me of Vertex's early days, the sense of building something meaningful rather than simply executing processes. The contrast with my final months at Vertex was striking, where political navigation had consumed increasing energy there. Catalyst's culture channeled that same energy into client impact and methodological refinement. The Asahi proposal is ready for review, Eliza announced, entering my office with tablet in hand. We've developed a customized framework for their market expansion challenges that integrates their specific organizational structure and decision processes. I reviewed the proposal with appreciation for its elegant design, a solution that acknowledged Asahi's unique cultural context and complex approval hierarchies while creating pathways for innovative market approaches. This was precisely the type of customized methodology that standardization couldn't deliver effectively. This is exceptional work, I told her. The integration of their cultural priorities with practical innovation pathways addresses exactly what standardized approaches. Miss, Eliza beamed with professional pride. The team is energized in a way I haven't seen in years. Building something that genuinely delivers client value without artificial constraints, it changes how people approach their work. Her observation captured something fundamental about our journey. Beyond the business strategy and investment leverage, we were creating an environment where talented professionals could apply their expertise without the compromise that often comes with corporate standardization. The result was not just client impact, but professional fulfillment that attracted additional talent to our growing organization. While Catalyst flourished, developments at Vertex followed a more complex trajectory. The special committee established by the board had begun its work evaluating strategic refinements to the standardization approach. James Harrison provided occasional updates on internal dynamics, revealing significant tension between governance and management perspectives. The committee is taking their mandate seriously, he reported during one of our discreet conversations. They've commissioned an independent analysis of client retention and satisfaction metrics, comparing results before and after standardization implementation. The preliminary findings aren't favorable to Greg's position. This external validation reinforced what Preston Holdings had argued during the board meeting, that standardization was undermining client relationships without delivering compensating operational benefits. More significantly, it came from sources management couldn't dismiss as personally motivated. How is Marcus responding? I asked, curious about his adaptation to the changing dynamics. Carefully, James replied. He's positioning himself as open to evolutionary refinements while still defending the core strategic direction. The political reality is becoming clear to him. Rigid defense of a failing strategy risks his leadership position, while complete reversal undermines his credibility. The insight confirmed my assessment of Marcus's character, pragmatic enough to adjust when necessary, but unwilling to acknowledge fundamental misjudgment. His gradual repositioning suggested he recognized the mounting evidence against universal standardization, but was seeking a path that preserved his authority and reputation. 3 weeks after the special committee began its work, Vertex issued a press release announcing strategic enhancements to the company's service delivery framework. The carefully worded statement outlined a modified approach that would maintain Standardization benefits for appropriate service categories while preserving customized methodologies for complex client challenges. Industry analysts immediately recognized the significance of this shift, with several explicitly noting the connection to Preston Holdings' intervention and Catalyst's early success with former Vertex clients. Tech Innovation published an analysis titled Vertex Course Correction: Responding to Market Feedback and Shareholder Pressure, which directly credited our dual-track strategy with influencing the change. The public announcement represented meaningful progress, but the implementation details would determine whether the shift was substantive or merely cosmetic. 2 days later, I received an unexpected meeting request directly from Catherine Wilson, the lead independent director who had facilitated the board discussion. Preston Holdings has demonstrated legitimate concern for Vertex's strategic direction, Catherine began when we met at her law firm's offices, a neutral location away from Vertex headquarters. The board appreciates both the substance of your analysis and the constructive approach to engagement. We're focused on long-term shareholder value, I replied, maintaining the formal distinction between personal history and investment position. Vertex has tremendous potential that was being undermined by an overly rigid standardization strategy. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. The special committee's findings support many of your concerns. Client satisfaction metrics have declined significantly in complex service categories, while standardization has delivered only modest operational efficiencies. The candid acknowledgement was significant coming from Vertex's governance leadership. It confirmed that directors were engaging substantively with the evidence rather than simply defending management decisions. The announced strategic enhancements represent meaningful progress, Catherine continued. However, the board recognizes that effective implementation will require leadership with deep understanding of both standardization efficiencies and customized innovation approaches. Her emphasis on leadership raised an intriguing possibility that I hadn't anticipated: potential executive changes beyond just strategic adjustment. I maintained professional neutrality while she continued. We've been discussing organizational changes to support this balanced approach, Catherine explained. The current tension between operations and innovation functions isn't serving client needs effectively. We're considering structural adjustments to create better alignment. The diplomatic language likely referred to Greg's position, which had been built around aggressive standardization as the exclusive strategic direction. A genuinely balanced approach would undermine his authority and influence within the organization. Organizational structure should reflect strategic priorities, I agreed carefully. If Vertex is genuinely committed to balancing standardization with customization where appropriate, leadership alignment around that vision is essential. Catherine studied me thoughtfully before presenting an unexpected proposition. The board is considering establishing a new executive position, Chief Client Solutions Officer, with responsibility for ensuring the right methodological approach for each client's specific needs. This role would have authority to implement customized approaches where standardization proves insufficient. The proposal represented a significant governance intervention into operational structure, creating a counterbalance to Greg's standardization authority without directly removing him. More remarkably, Catherine's next statement revealed the board's true intention. Given Preston Holdings' significant ownership position and demonstrated concern for Vertex's strategic direction, we believe a representative with your expertise would be an appropriate candidate for this position. Would you consider rejoining Vertex in this capacity? The offer was stunning in its implications. 8 weeks after terminating me for opposing standardization, Vertex's board was proposing my return in a newly created role specifically designed to implement the balanced approach Preston Holdings had advocated. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the strategic calculation behind the proposal. I appreciate the board's confidence, I replied carefully. However, my current professional commitments make such a role challenging to consider. Catalyst innovation. Partners is developing successfully, with client engagements that demonstrate the market demand for customized approaches to complex challenges. Catherine nodded understanding. We anticipated that response given your new venture's momentum. The board is prepared to discuss alternative arrangements that might accommodate both roles during a transition period. Perhaps a special advisor. Position with specific authority regarding methodological approaches. The counterproposal revealed the board's seriousness. They were willing to create flexible arrangements rather than insisting on traditional employment structure. This suggested genuine recognition of the value I could bring to implementing the balanced strategy rather than merely attempting to neutralize Preston Holdings' influence. That's an intriguing possibility, I acknowledged. Any such arrangement would require careful consideration of potential conflicts and appropriate governance boundaries. Preston Holdings remains a significant Vertex shareholder with fiduciary responsibilities to its investors. Of course, Catherine agreed. The board would work with corporate counsel to establish appropriate parameters. The fundamental objective is harnessing your expertise to help Vertex implement this balanced approach effectively, benefiting both clients and shareholders. We concluded the meeting with agreement to explore potential advisory arrangements that would allow me to contribute to Vertex's strategic implementation while maintaining my leadership role at Catalyst. The conversation represented a remarkable evolution in the dynamic, from terminated executive to potential strategic advisor with board-level support. The following week brought another significant development. Greg Parsons announced his resignation from Vertex, effective immediately. The press release cited pursuit of new opportunities, standard corporate language for departures under pressure. More tellingly, Marcus's statement emphasized appreciation for Greg's contributions during Vertex's operational realignment phase, implicitly positioning his tenure as a completed project rather than ongoing leadership. James called shortly after the announcement. The board made it clear to Marcus that Greg's rigid standardization approach was becoming a liability, he explained. Rather than face public demotion through the new organizational structure, he chose to depart. Greg's exit removed the most significant internal obstacle to implementing the balanced approach Preston Holdings had advocated. It also created opportunity for cultural renewal within Vertex, potentially healing some of the division created during the aggressive standardization push. 2 days later, I received another call, this time from Marcus himself. His tone was markedly different from our previous interactions, reflecting the evolved reality of our relationship. The board has briefed me on their discussions regarding a potential advisory role, he began without preamble. I want you to know that despite our past differences, I support the concept. Vertex needs to implement this balanced approach effectively, and your expertise would be valuable in that process. The statement represented significant personal adjustment for Marcus, acknowledging both the strategic shift away from universal standardization and my potential contribution to the new direction. Whether motivated by pragmatic acceptance of board direction or genuine recognition of previous misjudgment, the evolution was meaningful. I appreciate that perspective, I replied. Any advisory arrangement would need to respect both Vertex's interests and my commitments to Catalyst and Preston Holdings. The potential conflicts require careful navigation. Understood, Marcus said. But if structured appropriately, I believe such an arrangement could benefit all parties. Vertex implements an effective balanced strategy. Catalyst demonstrates the market value of customized approaches, and Preston Holdings' investment in Vertex appreciates through improved performance. His framing was surprisingly enlightened, recognizing the potential for mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. It suggested genuine growth beyond the defensive posture that had characterized our previous interactions. Over the next 2 weeks, Vertex's corporate counsel worked with Sophia to develop a formal advisory agreement that addressed potential conflicts while establishing clear authority regarding methodological approaches. The final structure was innovative. creating a strategic methodology council with representatives from both client services and operations, which I would chair as independent advisor with tie-breaking authority when consensus couldn't be reached. This approach maintained appropriate governance boundaries while providing meaningful influence over implementation of the balanced strategy. It also created institutional framework for methodological decisions rather than relying solely on executive authority, a structural improvement that would outlast any individual's involvement. As these developments unfolded at Vertex, Catalyst continued its remarkable growth trajectory. Our client roster expanded to 7 active engagements, including 2 former Vertex clients who had independently terminated their relationships after experiencing standardization. The team grew to 17 professionals with expertise spanning innovation strategy, implementation methodology, and performance measurement. Most significantly, we secured our first major international client, a European manufacturing conglomerate seeking transformation of their innovation approach across multiple divisions. The engagement represented both validation of our methodology and opportunity for significant scaling beyond regional markets. The dual tracks we had established were now operating in harmony rather than opposition. Catalyst demonstrated the market value of customized innovation approaches through client acquisition and successful outcomes. Vertex implemented balanced strategy that preserved this approach for appropriate client needs while capturing standardization benefits where suitable. Preston Holdings maintained significant ownership in Vertex, benefiting from improved performance as the strategic correction took hold. 3 months after my termination, I found myself in a position that would have been impossible to imagine during that initial shock, leading a thriving innovation consultancy while simultaneously influencing Vertex's strategy through both investment position and advisory role. What Marcus had intended as rejection had transformed into multi-dimensional impact beyond anything possible within traditional corporate constraints. The journey's emotional dimension evolved similarly. Initial betrayal and disorientation had given way to clarity and purpose that transcended institutional validation. The professional identity I had built over 8 years at Vertex hadn't been diminished by termination. It had been liberated from organizational constraints, allowing expression through multiple channels aligned with genuine market needs and personal values. This evolution became particularly evident during a quarterly review session with Nakamura's leadership team. As we presented results from our customized innovation approach, including 2 successful product launches and significant process improvements, their chief strategy officer made an observation that captured the essence of our journey. "What's remarkable isn't just the methodological effectiveness," he noted, "but the authentic alignment between your approach and our organizational needs. There's no sense of forcing our challenges into predetermined frameworks, just genuine collaboration to develop solutions that work within our specific context." His comment reflected exactly what had been lost in Vertex's standardization push and reclaimed through our parallel strategy. Recognition that effective innovation requires respecting organizational uniqueness rather than imposing external uniformity. The insight applied not just to client methodology but to professional journey itself, where authentic expression had replaced institutional conformity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.